Film and Whiskey Nation, do you ever think about awards? Of course you do. You drink whiskey and watch movies, which means that you know that nothing is validated until a group of random people say, hey, we love what you're doing. The awesome thing about Doc Swinson's whiskey is that it isn't just some group of schlubs that are giving them awards. They have been winning attention from some of the most important whiskey experts that you can imagine. They've been voted best distillery in Washington State by the New York International Spirits Competition. They've been voted the best independent bottler by the Ascot Awards, as well as the best finished bourbon from the Ascot Awards for their La Menta Exploratory Cask. Their Exploratory Cask series is where they release some of the most fascinating and adventurous experiments. If you're ever checking out Doc's lineup and see a white label, there's a really good chance that that's the only time you'll see that bottle, so make sure you snatch it up. Doc Swinson's has been offering just phenomenal finished and blended whiskeys for quite some time now. You can find them online at docswhiskey.com. That's DOCS whiskey.com. In 2009, director James Cameron and star Sam Worthington gave the world a 3D thriller that promised to advance the world of CGI in unprecedented ways.
In 2022, we returned to Japan to try a whiskey with a budget about as large as this movie.
The film is Avatar.
The whiskey is Yamazaki 12.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
Ooh, I'm drinking some really good whiskey, Bob.
Oh, you're diving right in, huh?
Dude, this Yamazaki is really good.
And what's your name, drinker of whiskey?
Oh, drinker of whiskey. I like that. I'll go with that. I'm Brad G, everybody.
I have not tried this whiskey yet. I'm very excited to dive into it, Brad. We have not tried a Japanese whiskey in a long time.
Yeah. I'm really excited for you to try it, man. There's a lot going on. And when I looked at the price tag, I felt like there should be a lot going on.
Yeah, so, I think the theme tying together the movie and the whiskey today is budgetary excess.
Yeah, that's a great term, Bob.
Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, today we are looking at James Cameron's 2009 epic of CGI proportions, Avatar. We're starting a mini-series of films by James Cameron, who Brad is still on the fence about for some reason, and I don't understand it, because James Cameron is quite possibly the best action director of all time, and I'm hoping that by the end of this miniseries, and in addition to Titanic, which we've already reviewed on this podcast, that Brad will come around at least a little bit, because it seems like Brad thinks of James Cameron the way most people think of Michael Bay. And I think in both cases they're wrong, but also like don't do my boy Jim Cameron like that, man.
That's very astute. You are 100% right on that.
Now, I will say, like, a majority of the reason that you seem to be hesitant about doing James Cameron is this movie. And so I kind of figured, like, let's just do this one first and knock it out. We'll line it up with the release of Avatar 2. And spoiler alert, if you hang around till the end of this episode, I will be giving my thoughts on Avatar 2. I'm going to go see it opening weekend. And so I'm going to rush back from the theater, record my review, tack it on to the end of this episode. I asked Brad if he would go with me, and he said no. Like, he's just already counting out Avatar: The Way of Water.
I'm not driving 2 hours up to see you, spending 3 hours in the theater, over 3 hours, plus, you know, all the other stuff, and then driving 2 hours back.
Here's the thing, though. They're showing it in theaters by you. Like, I just want you to go see it, and then let's talk about it afterwards.
Yeah. The idea of getting away for 4 hours to see a movie is just a lot, man.
Yeah, okay, whatever. Well, I'll be here at the end of the episode to review that. Now, if you are new to the podcast, what we are doing this season is we're doing little mini-series of directors that we really want to knock out some of their major movies on our show. And so, like I said, we've done Titanic, but this is going to be our second James Cameron film. We're going to go back to the mid-1980s with his classic Aliens next week, and then we'll finish it out with his two Terminator films. the original from 84, and T2 Judgment Day to wrap things up. Brad, you've now watched Avatar and Titanic for this podcast. What are your thoughts on Cameron so far as we just kind of like get settled into James Cameron as we come out of David Lean territory?
David Lean. He knows how to shoot a vista, am I right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. If you want to know the origin of my bias against James Cameron, it actually came from when I was like probably 15, maybe 16. My best friend Mike and I were awake at like 3 a.m. playing video games, and we turned on the cable, and guess what was playing? Terminator. And at the time, I had no idea who James Cameron was, but I remember watching Terminator, and I might have had my first like movie take of all time, and not even necessarily about the movies, but you know how I hate the 80s?
Oh, I do. Yeah, with a passion.
Terminator was the origin of that, because Mike and I were watching it at like 4 a.m, and we were like, why is their hair the way it is? Why is the music the way it is? Why is their clothes the way it is? This is all terrible. And so James Cameron actually like started my take that the 80s suck.
Wow. Dude, you are coming out of the gate with hot takes. I love it when you alienate our audience in the first few minutes of the episode.
No, you got to save the alien puns for next week, Bob.
All right, we'll get around to your bad Terminator takes when we get there. But, okay, so now you've seen Titanic and you've seen Avatar. So you've seen Cameron at his most ambitious, I guess I would say. Yeah, romantic too. With his largest budgets, certainly, but also in kind of creating these big worlds for his characters to inhabit. And Avatar is obviously like the pinnacle of that. So I don't know, man. What are your impressions of him as a director, but also as kind of a crafter of worlds?
I think that Cameron has a really incredible ability to direct action.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, we'll just go back to the Michael Bay reference. Like, Michael Bay can direct him the hell out of an action sequence, as can James Cameron. I think the difference is that Cameron really spends a lot of time giving you people to care about in the midst of that action in a way that Bay doesn't always. Although I will say, I don't know if I've honestly seen a lot of Bay films. Like the main ones would have been the first Transformers.
Oh gosh. Yeah, don't judge him on those.
Yeah, so I'm genuinely not judging Bay. I'm just saying what I've heard.
That's like being like, oh yeah, Peter Jackson. I'm not a fan. Although I've only seen The Lovely Bones. Like, don't do that.
Oh man. So I guess getting back to Jimmy Cam, I think that he is overambitious with the plot development. And he is spot on with almost a Christopher Nolan-esque just swinging for the freaking fences when it comes to the action and the emotional payoff that action is going to bring. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. I like that comparison. And while we're in this zone, let's go ahead and segue into America's favorite segment, which we call Brad Explains. So again, if you're new to the podcast, or I mean, if this is your 300th time listening, we want to encourage you to listen to more of our episodes, first of all, but also you can find out more about us on our Patreon, patreon.com/filmwhiskey, where you can support us at 3 different tiers. At each tier, you get access to a special Discord server that we're on every single day, talking with members of Film and Whiskey Nation. At the upper tiers, you get uncensored content, you get early episodes. At the uppermost tier, you get episodes that we make just for the friends and family. What's that package called? The Viscosity package. If you're a Viscosity patron, you can, like, Brad, we turn out a lot of...
thick as hell,
It's
bro.
so thick with 2 C's. We produce a lot of episodes in a season. And if you're a Viscosity patron, you get even more episodes. It is the Film and Whiskey Plus, we should be calling it.
More Bob, more Brad.
So again, you can find us on patreon.com/filmwhiskey as we move into Brad Explains. This is the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the plot of the film that he has just seen, often for the first time. Brad, this was probably only your second time seeing Avatar?
I might have seen it twice in theaters.
I feel like you have very strongly asserted in the recent weeks, like, I haven't seen that movie since the theater and I'm never going to watch it again afterwards. So
well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think I saw it twice with friends.
Okay.
And that was it. Since I saw it in theaters, that was it. I could be wrong. Maybe.
Oh, okay. So you saw it twice in the theater. And now this is time number 3. Got it.
Like, it's kind of like when Endgame came out. Like, I wasn't a big Marvel person, but I went and saw it on opening night, and I had a dude cry behind me for half the movie. And on Monday, me and 2 of my best friends went and saw it as a matinee at like 10 a.m. And, and just kind of talked the whole time because it was like us and 5 other people in this massive theater. We just kind of chatted and discussed things throughout. So I'm like, I don't care for Marvel, but I still went and saw Endgame twice.
I love you to death, but the more I hear about your movie-going habits, the more I'm like, you seem like the opposite of the ideal person to accompany me to the movies.
Hey, but I did go and see Jojo Rabbit in theaters just on a whim.
Oh, so, wow. Okay. So, 3 years ago. All right, we have put 60 seconds on the clock. Brad, you have 1 minute to break down the plot of this movie, and go.
Avatar is a film about a crippled Marine named Jake Sully, whose twin brother is killed, and now Jake is able to, because of his genetic similarities, is able to take over a massive scientific endeavor to create an avatar for him to embody through his mind and science and all that stuff. So they go to this planet called Pandora. He embodies this blue person who is a part of the Na'vi race, which is a tall, lanky, blue humanoid race. And the goal is that they would make contact with the Na'vi and help them relocate away from the largest deposit of unobtainium, which is this really valuable metal. He becomes a Na'vi warrior and ends up falling in love with the princess of the tribe and becomes one of them and fights for their freedom from the evil human sky people.
There you go. That's Avatar, baby.
Bro, that might be one of my best Brad Explains ever.
That was a pretty good one. You even used the word crippled in the first 3 seconds just to be as un-PC as possible. Avatar's about a cripple.
I literally thought about it like as the word was coming out of my mouth. I was like, wait, what's the right way of saying that?
Oh my gosh, dude. All right, let's talk James Cameron here because, we're going to be talking about him for 4 weeks. There are some recurring themes that will come up with James Cameron, and I think that it is possible for James Cameron to be both one of the best world builders in cinema and one of its absolute worst dialogue writers. Like, he and George Lucas should collaborate on a project to outdo one another in the bad dialogue department. And of course, one of the big knocks on this movie, and we'll talk about the story elements that people knock, but one of the big knocks is the dialogue. And as I asked Brad, because I expected him to have just pure and utter disdain towards this movie, I said, Brad, maybe the best way to structure this episode would be to talk about your major grievances with the movie. And the first one you listed was the dialogue. So,
yep.
I don't know, man, take it away. What are your impressions of Cameron's dialogue?
I will say, as you brought up George Lucas, I'll get to your point in a second, Bob. I realized that one of the things people talk about a lot with the prequels is that they're like more political thriller type things. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what if Aaron Sorkin wrote episodes 1, 2, and 3 and Lucas directed and built the world and did all that stuff?
Emperor Palpatine's just like, walk with me, talk with me. And then
yes.
Just walking through the corridors.
Yeah, it would the opera scene would not have been seated. They would have just been walking endlessly. I think that the dialogue in Avatar struggles on 2 points. First off, the dialogue sucks. It is uninspiring. It does not make me fall in love with the characters. It honestly reminds me a little bit of Rogue One, where like the first half of Rogue One, you're like supposed to like fall in love with these people who are going to die in Act 2. And like Act 2 is awesome and it feels like a Star Wars movie and it's really well made. but the first act is rough.
Mm.
And a large part of it is due to the dialogue. Now, the acting in Rogue One is actually pretty good. Other than Zoe Saldana, who is a little more active, maybe like 30 to 40% in the movie on, she is spectacular.
She's great, dude. Other
than her, would you give anybody higher than like a B- on acting?
No, probably not. And I think I'd give the B- to Sigourney Weaver because I know, we're going to watch Aliens next week, a movie that she is nominated for Best Actress for because she's so good. And I know she has it in her. And I also know that Cameron has not set her up for success with this dialogue. That early scene of her and Giovanni Ribisi, where they're he's like, come into my office, and he holds up the rock, and he's like, this is why we're here. Unobtainium. It costs $20 million a kilo, or whatever he says. And it's she knows this. She's been here for 15 years. I know that you're trying to introduce the audience to the stakes and the MacGuffin and the driving force, but it's so bad.
But also, unobtainium. We can't obtain it, so we have to get rid of the blue people.
I love it.
It's so bad.
Yeah, I love that he was just you know what? It's going to be called unobtainium. And they're like, James, no, please, anything else. He's like, no, it doesn't matter. It's going to be unobtainium.
I directed Titanic, damn it.
Okay, so we've touched on the dialogue. Let's talk a little bit about Cameron himself. By all accounts, he believes in himself a lot. And his self-belief comes across in many ways as, how do I phrase this? Holishness. And a lot of people have not liked working with him because he is so, I don't even want to say full of himself, but just so self-confident. And
have you heard the story about him and Neil deGrasse Tyson?
No, but those sound like two of the most insufferable people that you could ever put in a room together.
So Neil deGrasse basically tells him, hey, the stars in the sky when, Rose is talking to what's his face and Leo's falling into the ocean. He's like, the stars in the sky are wrong. That's the southern hemisphere. And James was like, okay, whatever. And 20 years later, Neil deGrasse runs into him again and goes, oh, hey, by the way, stars are still wrong. I noticed you did a re-release or something. And apparently James pulls up Wikipedia and he looks at Titanic. He goes, huh, it's made over $1.5 billion and walks away.
That's exactly how Neil deGrasse Tyson deserves to be treated. But
yes.
Okay, but so
100%.
Back to Cameron. He is very confident in his abilities, but he really has earned it in a lot of ways. He worked his way up from just being a crew member on these really, really low budget horror films working for Roger Corman to the point where he started directing, and his first theatrical film is called Piranha 2. It's a low budget crappy horror movie, but even in that and working on a shoestring budget, there were some really ingenious things that he was doing behind the scenes. He gets this idea for Terminator. He makes that on a shoestring budget. It makes a hell of a lot of money for what it was supposed to cost. And there's this recurring pattern that with pretty much every successive movie, he gets more and more ambitious with the stories he wants to tell and the world he wants to build. The studio comes close to pulling the plug. They always go over budget. The studio doesn't believe in him. He has to do something like sacrifice his own director's fee or tie it to the profits of the movie and not take anything up front. And then lo and behold, they always make a ton of money, and he proves everybody wrong. And it's gotten to the point where it is such a pattern that it almost seems performative now. And it's happening right now with this new Avatar movie. So many people are counting him out. And I have no idea how it's going to turn out with Avatar, but I've read the reports that this is going to have to be the third or fourth highest grossing movie of all time just to turn a profit. Ooh. And I'm also you know what? If anyone can do it, it's James Cameron, who made back-to-back highest grossing movies ever.
You're just hitting me with all sorts of news about James Cameron. I think that Avatar did not deserve to make that much money. If I'm being very blunt. I think that I remember this. This Bob, you and I were 18, 19 years old. And this was in the prime of our older teenage years. This was set up to be just the introduction of 3D to the world. Like, all other 3D has sucked. You were wearing red and blue glasses from the 50s compared to what you're going to have now.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, Avatar always will be second rate, almost cut rate, in my opinion, because it never lived up to its billing. And when I watch it, I feel like I'm watching an animated film for half of it, and then a live action film when, Sam Worthington is playing his human character.
Sure.
And so I just, like, CGI has come a long way since then, especially because of what Marvel has done. But even with the newest Marvel films, I find myself going, CGI just isn't going to cut it for me. And so, in my opinion, between the terrible story, the really, really rough dialogue, the bad acting, there's not enough in Avatar to me that justifies it. Whereas, like, I watched Titanic, and Titanic is a hell of a film.
Yeah.
Truly an incredible film. And so I don't know if I see Avatar as deserving its place in the pantheon of Hollywood.
All right, so here are my two thoughts on that. And I'm going to say them both because I'll probably forget the second one, and I'm going to need you to help me recall it. So first, I think we need to talk about the historical context that this movie gets released into. And then secondly, I want to talk about Cameron's sort of filmmaking prowess, or like his encyclopedic knowledge of cinema. So first of all, I think you have to keep in mind that this movie was so revolutionary when they released it that we're watching it now through a lens of 13 years of technological development that all rest on the shoulders of Avatar, right? Like, Iron Man comes out the year before Avatar. And if you just traced Iron Man to Endgame without Avatar in a vacuum, I don't think Marvel gets there. Cameron was doing something with computers that had really never been done before. I mean, the closest that you ever got to something like this, where it was a completely CGI world with motion capture, is those crappy Robert Zemeckis movies that, like, when he did The Polar Express and Beowulf. That's the closest I can think of anything. And that looks horrible. And so, we can talk a little bit about how, especially in the early scenes of this film, I did feel like I was watching a video game cutscene a little bit. I really did. And yet, there's something about the fact that he uses that motion capture and that he does such a good job, even in 2009, with the way that he captures facial expressions and body language, that you can tell that these characters are not completely built in a computer. They're too realistic in the way they react to things. Their facial expressions really come through. And so, does it seem a little bit chintzy when you're comparing it to the very best 2022 VFX? Maybe. But I also think that, you could probably release this in the theater today and it wouldn't look any worse than 90% of the stuff we're getting today. And I think that is a real credit to the film. You know what I mean? You have to take a step back and be like, we're judging this based on 13 years of technological advancements that only happened because this movie worked.
I get what you're saying, but I had this take in 2009.
Yeah, okay, so that's a good point. But that's part of the historical context thing. How many I don't know if you remember the stories around Avatar. Cameron was trying to get the theaters of America to install new equipment so that they could show his movie. No one had 3D equipment. No one was showing high frame rate stuff. Hell, most of the digital projectors back then were not even showing movies in 4K. And I watched this movie on my 4K TV last night just through streaming. So it probably wasn't even really 4K. It was probably 1080. This movie looks great, dude. I really think that it probably looks better at home now because of the advancements in technology than it looked in the theater in 2009, because he was so far ahead technologically of what the actual, mechanics that were available on the market could even do.
Yeah, I don't know if my 9-year-old TV can boast the same quality. I'm probably watching it at about 2009 level.
I come over to your house and it's still like an old square TV.
Yeah, it's not far off, man.
Like, what is
it's
this?
I think it's from like 2013.
Oh, yeah, man. Yeah.
Oh, I think that this is just me being curmudgeonly, Bob. I'm a crotchety old man. I don't like CGI.
Yeah.
That's 100% a bias. I think the other bias for me was truly not just the CGI, but the fact that this movie was supposed to usher in the new era of 3D.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you remember when they were trying to push 3D televisions?
Yep.
Like, it was all in this era. And I just always firmly, from the start, was like, F 3D, it sucks. Until I am like literally sitting in a holographic world and it's happening around me, like that's the only 3-dimensional media I want to consume. And so I guess I just, beyond the graphics being what they are, and there's beautiful moments. This might sound small, but the little like whirly bugs that he like touches and they like flip into this almost like a Japanese origami, like not crane.
Well, they look more like flying jellyfish. Like,
yeah, sure. Like beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. The trees that they like connect to hear the memories. Beautiful. Like there's parts of this movie that are incredibly well done, but the overall movie is about people, whether it's the humans or the Na'vi, and I just think the Na'vi don't look good.
All right, so let's go in on that a little bit, because I think you're right. I think that there's something kind of rubbery about their skin, and they never, for me, the moments that the Na'vi looked the worst is the moments where, like at the end of the movie, where they're overseeing sending the humans back to Earth.
Yep.
And it looks like these are two completely different. Like this is a green screen, and like these people are fake, these people are not fake, and they never do a good job of making them look like they're inhabiting the same environment.
Yes.
However, I will also say that seeing the Na'vi for the very first time in this movie is like, oh my God, is this how this movie is going to be? Like when Jake first goes into the Avatar, I'm like, oh God, this is going to be bad. However, it kind of distracts you for a little bit from the fact that everything around them is completely computer generated. And like, you hadn't seen something like that since maybe, I don't know, like talk about Attack of the Clones again. Like that looks like a PS2 cutscene.
Yes.
And like by the time that we get to the point where we're nearing the end of the film, where they're all nervous and they're kind of flying into the battle, and the one guy gives them a head nod and he looks over at Neytiri and they're like ready to go into battle, I was like, oh, like this is a super immersive world. None of this exists. It's not as if they're just rotoscoping in a blue person and everything else in the shot is real. Like nothing in this shot is real. And I think it's like, it kind of flies under the radar a little bit how detailed and how good of a job Cameron does building this world visually. Like everything that he doesn't do in the script to world build, he captures perfectly visually. Like you get to learn so much about like the botany and the biology of this planet. And even in that crappy like training montage where she's showing him how to fall and catch onto those big leaves as they fall down the canopy of the jungle, like that comes back into play at the end of the movie. And it's not dwelt on. It's not something that's like beaten into your skull. It's just a nice little visual callback. And I think that Cameron does a really good job using the CGI in ways that you almost forget everything is fake. But if there's one thing that you're right, it does still seem fake, it's the Na'vi. Yeah. And I'm kind of almost willing to sacrifice that though. Like I would like it reminds me of how Pixar will make their characters look like cartoons, but everything else besides the characters looks photorealistic, and you forget that they designed that too.
Bro, the short film Piper with the little sandbirds.
Yeah.
They zoom up on the crab and the bird, and it looks like real sand.
Right.
Like, it's amazing what Pixar can do. I think that the best moment with the Na'vi, like easily the best moment of animation and mocap, is when Neytiri pushes the douchebag other guy, if you don't mind the trope, and like crouches over Jake's, lifeless for the moment body and is like snarling, hissing at him.
Yep.
Bro, that's a hell of a moment, and they capture her ferocity just incredibly.
Yeah.
So I'll give them that. They have moments.
So this segues into that second point I wanted to make about Cameron's filmmaking abilities. And I really went in on this in our Titanic episode, that what makes Titanic work so well is that Cameron knows how to direct a horror movie. And those scenes where Jack and Rose are kind of trapped under deck and it just gets quiet for a while and the panic sets in and you start to hear the croaking of the ship as the leaks come through. It's terrifying, dude. That movie is terrifying. And people don't remember it being a horror movie, but that's half the reason it works. And he knows how to shoot horror. He knows how to shoot action, but he does it by establishing the world and then by working within it in a way that makes sense to the viewer from like a geographic standpoint. And it happens in this movie too. And I think the thing that you really have to carry over is think about the best sequences in Titanic and how he shot those. And then how he does the exact same thing here, but he isn't working with real sets. He's building all of it in a computer. And I think it's almost more admirable that he brings out so much emotion and so much clear action on screen, because honestly, Brad, we've seen so many of these DC and Marvel movies now that you see the behind the scenes pictures and they look just like Avatar. Like it's just a guy on strings with blue all around him and they fill everything in. But, when you go see a movie like, what's the one that just came out with The Rock? Black Adam, everything looks flat. Everything looks gray. There is no sense of geography. There's no sense of like weight to the things that they interact with on screen because it's also fake. And this movie, there are so many moments where I'm like, oh yeah, the Na'vi look fake, but I forget that everything they're interacting with on screen is also fake. And so I don't know, man. I just feel like you have to give Cameron credit, even if you don't like CG, for doing more with CG than almost any director in terms of making it feel cinematic.
I mean, does the credit kind of shift away from Cameron then into the, computer graphics team?
Oh, I'm sure. But, he's certainly the kind of guy that has his fingerprints all over that, too.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. He's definitely fastidious about his movies. But I guess I'm just not quite on the same page as you, Bob, because I don't respect CGI that much. And that, like, I don't know if that's just like douchey of me to say, because I know it takes an incredible amount of work. Like I read an article the other week about how Marvel is just grinding the CGI community into the dust and how brutal it's been to work for them and, all this stuff. So like, I know it takes an incredible amount of work to bring these places to life. And I don't want to discredit that at all. What I'm saying is, I watch a movie like Lord of the Rings that has a similar epic feel to it, as what Cameron is shooting for here. And I never once have to believe, or think to myself, oh, does this feel realistic or not? And yet with any movie that is like largely CGI, I find myself going, oh, that doesn't look really, oh yeah, oh yeah. And it reduces from the movie going experience for me. And so I'm with you. It's a crazy amount of work. There's a lot of it that's really beautiful, but I'd rather see real stuff. I'm more of a lenient, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. I just think that there is something to be said. I just saw today that Cameron is really out here just hitting Marvel with left hooks left and right. Like he's just shitting on Marvel all over the place. And he's talking about how, their fully CG characters just don't have the level of expression of the Na'vi, especially in this new movie, which, to be fair, I have not seen to verify. But I read the comments, as I tend to do, and I shouldn't. And, of course, it's like a bunch of Marvel bros who are like, can you even imagine if Marvel took 13 years to make a sequel to Infinity War like Cameron took? And I was like, I wish Marvel had taken 13 years. Because even if this CGI, as we get older, Brad, if it shows its age and it looks crappy 50 years from now, it will still, when we hold it up against its peers, you can see the level of care and attention to detail. And there's a reason that it took so long for them to make this movie. And like,
yeah,
I think you have to separate out the quality by 2022 standards from Cameron versus his peers. And it gets back to your point about the 3D stuff too. Like, the reason 3D sucks is because as soon as Cameron did all of the heavy lifting and did all the work to get it in place, then 50 copycats, or not even copycats, but opportunists came after him and dumped crappy versions of 3D into movie theaters. And so after a couple years, we were all sick of it because they did a shitty job. And I remember when they re-released Titanic in 3D because Cameron had gone back in and painstakingly added depth and layers to the 3D, like by hand, essentially. And that movie looked amazing in 3D. And I think the thing of, like, you just have to acknowledge that a lot of the things that Cameron has helped pioneer, we shit on now, but it's because we're jaded at the people who came after Cameron and took advantage of how hard he works by giving us a subpar product. And I think sometimes we reflect back onto Cameron's stuff, things that aren't really fair to him, because if everybody had been as painstaking about the 3D or the CGI or whatever as he had, then I think we'd have a lot better cinematic movies like this to talk about.
You mean that people are prone to cut corners to try and make a quick buck?
In Hollywood, you say?
In Hollywood? No. Dude, I don't know if I'll ever have another place to talk about this. I had just forgotten about the 3D re-release epidemic that happened 10 to 15 years ago. And yet I remember going to see Jurassic Park in theaters because I was like, it's being re-released in 3D, but I'm like, when will I have a chance to see Jurassic Park in the theaters ever again in my life? And I couldn't have anticipated the pandemic and how you can now rent theaters and all that. But like, I went to see that. I went to see the Star Wars prequels re-released in theaters. Even though I saw those in theaters as like a, 10, 11, 12-year-old, I was like, when will I have a chance to see these in theaters again? And yet, bro, the 3D is so bad. It was so bad.
Oh, man. All right. Hey, let's hit pause here. Let's drink this Yamazaki. What do you say?
Bro, we're like 35 minutes into this episode. Let's do it.
All right. Today we are trying the Yamazaki 12-year. Brad, this is our first Japanese whiskey of the season, I think. I don't think we've had any others this season, have we?
Probably only like our fourth or fifth overall.
Here's the thing is Japanese whiskey is finally starting to become more popular in the United States. And as I go to the liquor store, like the Japanese whiskey section has expanded from like 4 bottles to 4 shelves. Do you know what I mean? Like there's probably 50 of them now. It's still the smallest whiskey section in the store. And so I struggle to know what's what or what to try. It's also pretty pricey. Like it's probably even pricier than Scotch if you're like taking it as like a 1-to-1 ratio and considering import fees and all that. So I just don't know a lot about Japanese whiskey, but I also don't think we've ever really tried a bad one, Brad.
Yeah, everything that we've tried has been good. I mean, heck, which one was it that had the awesome
the Nika
topper?
Golden Gold.
Yeah, that was just really, really cool. And I think that every single Japanese whiskey we've had, we've at the very least been like, oh, this is like really solid, if not really, really good.
Well, this one today is a beast, and it is known for being one of the best offerings to come out of Japan. The Yamazaki distillery is pretty famous. It's owned by Suntory. So we get to say, for relaxing times, make it Suntory time, which I love doing that every time we get a chance.
Let's go, Bill Murray.
They've been releasing this product since 1984. It's aged for 12 years at the Yamazaki distillery. It's 100% malted barley in the mash bill. Brad, what is this clocking in at proof-wise?
Bob, this bad boy is clocking in at 86 proof points.
Just like with Scotch, we talk a lot about how you don't usually get high proof points. Now, there's always exceptions. There's Nika straight from the barrel, which people, I think that's what it's called, which people really, really like. So we're going to try this one. It's 86 proof. Brad, you've already been sipping on it and raving about it. What are you picking up on the nose here?
Oh, dude, the nose is honey, just all sorts of nice thick honey, cherry, vanilla, oak, and then on the back end, after I sat with it for a while, I got a lot of cinnamon coming through. This is an incredible nose, Bob. I gave it a 9.5 out of 10.
It's very delicate, and it really toes the line between a nice bright Irish whiskey and like an entry-level Scotch. Like there's not a lot of smokiness to it. And I'm not even talking about peat, but I'm talking about that kind of like weightiness you get with Scotch, even at kind of the lower levels of Scotch. This definitely keeps it nice and bright. There's a lot of floralness to it. There's, I'm definitely getting some citrus. I think you're right about orange. I think that there's some melon here as well. I'm getting a little bit of honeydew on this. I really like it. I just don't know, like in a vacuum, if you put like 10 similar smelling whiskeys in a row, I don't know if there's anything about this that's making me like go crazy. I know you gave it a 9.5, but for me, this is kind of like, oh, this is a really, really nice, bright Irish whiskey scent. So I'm only going to give it a 7.5 on the nose.
Man, you're crazy, Bob. Go home. The palate here, I think that you get a lot of vanilla and honey up front. There was a bunch of like coconut refreshing sweetness in the middle. And then at the back end of my tongue, I got a little bit of oak with some like lightly roasted coffee beans. It got just a tiny bit of that cocoa at the very end. And I once again was a huge fan of the palate here and gave it a 9.5 out of 10.
This is interesting. I followed you like through the mid palate, and your note of coconut was interesting because I wasn't picking it up at first, but it almost has more of like a coconut water. Like it's not sweet, but it's almost like that husk of coconut kind of thing. I really like that. It does get kind of oaky on the back end. And for me, there was just the faintest little wisp of, I couldn't tell if it was raspberry or strawberry, but it almost reminded me of like a strawberry shortcake with coconut shavings on top. Really interesting. Really, really good. Not at all like the nose, though. I don't get any of that citrus. I don't get any of the melon that I got. So very different, but still really consistent, if that makes sense. I'm going to give it an 8.5 on the palate.
Bob with his oxymoronic tasting notes. Differently consistent, if you will. I think that it slightly tails off at the end of this experience. It leaves you with a really beautiful honey, and I almost got like a little bit of pear on the back end. It doesn't turn bitter at all. It does get a little bit oaky. It just didn't have quite enough punch. I think if this was like 90 proof or 92 proof, it would last a little longer throughout the whole drinking. I gave it an 8.5 on the finish, Bob.
Yeah, man, I really like the finish on this. It gets oaky towards the back. I think some of that almost smokiness comes out there, but it's more of just like a nice burnt wood kind of thing. And like, so you're really getting the inside of the barrel here with the finish. But then there's a layer of, I can't quite place it, Brad, but it's like some sort of almost a candy for me, just a wisp of it way after I swallow that shoots back up my tongue. It almost reminds me of like the green Laffy Taffy. Like there's like a sour apple kind of thing going on, and it's really, really good, and it's super refreshing. And so at every point in this tasting, I'm getting fruit coming through, and that's what's keeping this from being just kind of like a generic scotchy taste. And you know, you had that note of toasted coconut. I had melon. I had orange. We talked about strawberries. We talked about raspberries. We've talked about apple at this point. This is a super complex whiskey, especially at only 86 proof. And like a good scotch, I actually don't think it needs to be higher proof. I think the alcohol makes itself known, and this feels full-bodied enough and complex enough that I don't just think making it more potent would do a lot to add to the flavor. And in fact, I think it might mask some of these more subtle flavors we're getting here. So yeah, I'm actually going to, let me get my score. I'm going to bump it up to a 9 on the finish.
Yeah, I just think just a few more proof points would lengthen the experience all the way through the finish. That's all.
Well, you're wrong. So what are you going to do about it?
I think that the balance is a 9.5 out of 10. Like, this is an incredible balance of like delicate complexity that never overwhelms itself. And I was really impressed with what they're doing here.
Yeah, I'll also give it a 9.5. I was going to give it a 9, but I like what you said. It's a balance of a lot of delicate flavors. And that's part of why I think that increasing the proof really would swallow some of those up. I don't think I've ever had a whiskey that reminded me of so many different fruit flavors at so many different points of the tasting experience. It is a really complex, very delicate whiskey that, man, I really would recommend anyone to try tasting this. So I'm going to give it a 9.5, and that gets us into value, which is where things are going to go a little bit sideways.
Mm-hmm. I think that if you get this at price, it is priced at $180 in the state of Ohio. If you're able to find this for $180, you're not in the mid-tier whiskey range. Like, if you're going to spend over $100, $150 on a whiskey, you know what you're getting into. So I'm pricing it for those types of people.
Mm-hmm.
I would give it an 8.5.
Wow.
At $180.
Wow.
I think that if you're going to spend this much on a whiskey, it had better be a damn good whiskey. And I think that this delivers. You know, even if I wish it was a few points higher on the proof range, like I think this is an incredible whiskey. The problem that you run into is the fact that you can't really find this for $180. You can find it for $350 to $500.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'm like, oh, like. It's not worth that much money, Bob.
Yeah, and here's the thing is, like, we haven't had enough Japanese whiskey to say, like, how this fits in amongst its peers. Like, we're really only comparing this to Irish and Scotch, and that's mostly just because of the mash bill. And if this was a Scotch, I'd be like, 180 is too much. You can get better Scotch for cheaper. But I don't know that that's true for Japanese. So this is really hard because part of me wants to give it like a 5.5 on value. You're giving it an 8.5. I think I'll split the difference here. I'll give it a 7 on value. 180 is more than I would pay for almost any whiskey. And so I really don't think that I would shell out $180 for this, but it is probably the most complex Japanese whiskey that we've had so far. And I would heartily recommend trying it, assuming you can get a pour of it for less than like $30 or $40.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in the same place. Like, if you can get a bottle of it, you know, and split it between you and two or three other people, like, great, go for it. If you're able to buy it yourself, awesome. But yeah, if you can find a pour for $20 to $30, I think this is a really good whiskey and worth the experience.
All right, what are you coming out to, Brad?
I'm at a 45.5 out of 50.
Wow. So you're over the 90 mark here.
Yeah, I'm at a 91 out of 100.
Holy shit. Okay, I am at a 41.5, so I'm a little bit lower than you, but that still brings us out to an 87 out of 100 or a 43.5 out of 50. Now, anything over a 35 is where we typically start recommending. Anything over a 40 is like, you got to try it or get a bottle. And I think, again, you know, if you can find it and you're willing to shell out that much money to have a really good Japanese whiskey, it might be worth it. But it is certainly worth trying, and I would recommend that with no hesitation.
Yeah, easily recommend it. Along with a movie that I don't know if I'd recommend, Bob.
Whoa. Okay. Well, let's get back into talking about Avatar.
Yeah, let's get to it, man. All right, everybody. That was Yamazaki 12, an expensive whiskey that pretty much is worth it, Bob.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good way of phrasing it. It is pretty much worth it.
You know what else is pretty much worth the cost of admission, Bob?
I don't.
Canada's favorite segment of the podcast, Two Facts and a Falsehood.
I'm getting to the point where I just don't enjoy this anymore. You're stumping me week in and week out. I need to start cheating.
Yeah, you probably should.
If you're not
cheating, you're not trying.
I was going to say, I need to start employing the Brad G. Coin of Destiny approach.
Bro, I will not have you impugn my honor in such a way. If there's anything I take seriously, it's chance.
What a quote. That's the quote of the season. All right, let's hop into Two Facts and a Falsehood. This is where Brad presents 3 items to me as fact, one of which is completely made up, and I have to try to guess which one is the lie. So Brad, hit me with your 2 facts and a falsehood.
Alrighty, Bob. Fact number 1. In preparation for the film, Cameron had the cast do long hikes through the jungles on some of the Hawaiian Islands. And on these hikes, Zoe Saldana would wear a warrior outfit with a tail appendage to help her gain confidence in her role.
So you're telling me she's a furry?
Hey, man, this was like 2008, all right? There weren't such things as furries back then. Fact number 2, Zoe Saldana is reunited in Avatar with Joel David Moore, who plays Norm, who also played a small role on the pirate crew of 2003's Pirate of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl.
Nice.
Fact number 3, Zoe Saldana has appeared in 3 out of the 5 highest grossing films of all time, a feat not achieved by any other performer. Her films have grossed more than $11 billion worldwide.
I think 3 is true, right? Because, I mean, she's definitely got this. She's definitely got Endgame. And I assume Infinity War is up there.
I'm not going to tell you if it's true or not, Bob.
Well, I'm talking out loud because I'm going to really be pissed if you're like, Infinity War is number 7. I'm going to assume 3 is true for now.
Okay.
Number 2 sounds like it could be plausible. I mean, she did play a small part in that movie, and so did, well, I don't know if the other guy did, but sounds plausible. Number 1, about Zoe Saldana being a furry. Maybe it's just because I like Zoe Saldana. She seems very genuine and down to earth, and I just don't want to think that she would do that kind of a thing. And I'm like reading into it. Like she just wore a tail. She wasn't actually a furry. But I'm like, no, not my girl Zoe.
The like, furry
she wouldn't do such a thing. Yeah. I'll say number 1 is a falsehood. And I have no other reason for that than like I just don't see Zoe doing that. But Bob? I don't know her at all, and that's my answer.
According to IMDb, fact number 1 is a truth. 100% true. Fake news.
Which one was false?
The falsehood was, so I'm not going to lie, I was doing research on Zoe Saldana because I decided that she should be the theme because she was the best actor in the movie. And so I did not know that she was in Pirates of the Caribbean. So I completely made up that Joel David Moore was also in that movie.
As this movie was playing out, I had to look up Joel David Moore because when he was in his avatar body at the end of the movie, and he was like on horseback and firing a machine gun, and then he was like getting knocked off his horse and going, whoa! I was like, oh my God, I think that guy played Linguini in Ratatouille. Oh. I think that's the Ratatouille guy.
Is
and
it?
It turns out it's not. But
that was a lot of build up there, Bob.
Well, but it ruined part of the ending of the movie for me because then I could only think about Linguini from Ratatouille in like on Pandora, like just running around like, little chef, what are you doing?
So it's like at the end of I get it's been out for a little while. At the end of Everything Everywhere All at Once with
Raccacoonie. Yeah,
they're just running through the forest. Oh, man. Fun fact, Joel David Moore, my wife is watching this and she heard his voice and goes, oh, he's somebody, and immediately starts Googling it. He was a regular on the TV show Bones, for any Bones fans out there.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Haley.
You're
All
welcome.
Right. Brad, we've talked a lot about this movie. Do you have anything else you really want to say, or should we just kind of go right into Make It a Double?
Well, I think one of the few takeaways I had from this movie that I think might be unique to me, I mean, it's the internet, so nobody has original thoughts. One of the things I found myself pondering as I watched this film was in the midst of kind of the training sequence, if you will, when, Jake Sully is going through the rites of becoming a Na'vi warrior. Or, whatever the name of their tribe is. I realized, I was like, our culture, the Western culture in general, I can't necessarily speak for like France or Germany or Britain, but I feel like this might be true for them as well. We don't really have any healthy rites of passage for what it means to be a man or a woman in our culture. And I think that there's something really powerful about having a clear-cut pathway of like, hey, these are the things it takes to be a man in our culture or a woman in our culture. And I know that might... I'm not trying to be controversial here. I know that being a man and a woman is in a very unique place in America right now. But I guess if I had to broaden it out, the Na'vi have a very specific understanding of how you gain purpose and meaning in your life. And our culture doesn't really have that. And I think that Avatar actually really gives you a beautiful picture of the importance of community in helping people know why they are here on this earth.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that like way too deep for Avatar? Or?
I don't think it's too deep. I think that because you and I come from a like Christian church background, I think we might need to add context to what you're saying. Because I think I know what you're getting at, which is like we don't really have rights that indicate a
like
growth or maturity or coming of age.
RITES.
Yes. And
yeah,
I mean, we kind of do in like a very casual way, right? Like we have your high school graduation and like, you know, if you're Jewish, you have your bar mitzvah. But like even that in America has become secularized to the point where like I'm 13 now, so it's my bar mitzvah. You know what I mean? Like it's not so much
give me presents.
Right. And so I get what you're saying. You know, we before we press record, you were kind of kicking this idea around with me and you talked about how, you know, even on Pandora, it's like, okay, now that you have achieved this level or whatever, and you have been considered a man, quote unquote, now you can choose a woman. And we were talking about like the dangerous gender politics of that. But also I think there's something to be said about like, you are not ready to pick a life partner until you're mature enough in all of these other areas. And so like, it seems super regressive, right? But then there's also the idea of like, there does need to be some sort of standard. I don't know. Yeah, not standard, but like a rival into adulthood. And we do a really bad job at that in America. And I think Cameron, you know, to his credit, and he does beat you over the head with it. And these are themes that we will see all through his movies, especially in Aliens next week. And he talks about it himself, that the idea of a greedy corporation who is also backed by military force and your heroes having to go up against that to win the day, like that's all through here. Cameron really hates the idea of like the military being used by force, and he really, really hates greedy billionaires, which is why he takes such pleasure in like sticking it to the man and giving them the finger every time he makes a movie. Because he's like, I'm going to make it for $1 billion and there's nothing you can do about it.
What's the name of what's the name of Kate Winslet's fiance in Titanic?
I don't know what his name is in the movie, but it's Billy Zane, the actor.
Billy Zane's performance represents everything you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I like that you pointed it out. I don't think it's really a major theme in the movie, but I think it gets back to this idea of something that is wholly foreign to American eyes and ears that actually does have some value to it.
Yeah. I will say the whole like transferring consciousness from one being to another had some real weird vibes to it. And I didn't know how I felt about it.
Well, even just the idea of like they built the Na'vi from a mixture. And this is the thing about Cameron. He's like, I'm not going to dwell on the how. Like, we're just going to get into the bodies. And then the wonder of this world is hopefully going to sweep you up. And I kind of respect it because it's like, at the end of the day, who cares?
Yeah.
And he kind of knows who cares. But the way they try to gloss over it, which is like, we built these things from a combination of your DNA and Na'vi DNA. And I'm like,
that's a little weird.
It's a little weird. But also, like, how do the minds actually sync up? They don't really. I mean, you get into a machine and then your mind is just synced up. And I'm like, how? But also, why didn't they just synthetically build Na'vi if they have Na'vi DNA and then just like educate them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To go be emissaries. Like, why did you have to develop this whole program where they have to be mind controlled by? It just seems so much easier to just be like, hey, Sigourney Weaver, like just teach them English.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't get it.
We're getting right back to Attack of the Clones. Why don't you just hire the cloners on Camino to make you a clone Na'vi army?
Should we be making this a double with Attack of the Clones?
Oh, I call it. I'm putting it in there. Attack of the Clones. Go watch it.
Well, to officially preview it, we have a segment that we like to wrap the episodes up with called Make It a Double, where we pair this with another film to make the ideal double feature. And it sounds like Brad is using maybe the most reviled of all Star Wars films, Attack of the Clones, to pair up with Avatar.
A film that I objectively like, but recognize it's my least favorite of the 6 original films.
I think that this is hard to pair up with anything because it's like it has pieces and parts of everything. I feel like I've seen this movie 100 times, but the James Cameron element of it, I'm like, I've never seen anything like this before. So pairing it up with something is kind of like a moot point because, you know, I could pick 100 white savior movies and they would line right up with this. I could pick 100 sci-fi movies where people go to a different planet and they line right up with this. I guess the most obvious one would be The Matrix, where you plug in with your mind to another body in a different world. And like, so, you know, The Matrix is a great movie. And it's
Ready Player One.
Ready Player One, that might be an okay one. And I actually liked that movie a lot more than apparently most people did. I'll go with The Matrix just because that movie's rad. And I actually think that from the midpoint of this movie on, it gets really, really good too. So yeah, watch The Matrix and watch Avatar.
Are we going to talk about the Pocahontas of it all?
I mean, here's the thing. It's been talked about to death. Like, we know. We all know.
Just making sure.
It's a white savior movie. It's a Pocahontas movie. You know, is that an inherent flaw with the movie? I don't know. It depends on if you think this movie sucks. It's the way the story is told in this movie. It's been told 100 times before. This doesn't do it really any better or worse than any of those other movies. So, like, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right, man. What's your final score on Avatar?
Oh, 7.5.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's solid. I think it's fun. I think that the first half is really rough. And then from the moment that they destroy the home tree on, it's just, I texted you this. It's just pretty rad.
Yeah.
Like, it's just really fun action movie sequences after action movie sequences. I think that he's not fully original in his action sequences. Like, and I'm not talking about the graphics or what you're seeing. It's more of like the style of them. They feel pretty rote. Of like, oh, they have a surprise attack and then they get pushed back and then something unexpected happens. And so like, it's not like the action scenes move into new territory, but they're really well done and they're fun. So yeah.
I couldn't decide between an 8 and an 8.5. And I was not expecting that because again, like the first 15 minutes of this movie, I was like, damn it, is Brad going to be right? Like, am I going to have to go in there and be like, Avatar does suck?
I am right, Bob.
I think that this movie is an 8 out of 10 because it's a flawed movie. But I think the technological advancement, like I think what this movie represents is almost more interesting than the movie itself. Like it really did push the industry forward. And I don't think you can take that away from Cameron. It's a pretty good movie. Sam Worthington is not good. Zoe Saldana knocks it out of the park. And so I'll give it an 8 out of 10. And that takes us to an average of a 7.75, which puts us pretty much right in line with the general public. This has a 7.8 on IMDb. So for all the people out there that say this movie sucks, it seems like you don't hate it that much because you rated it at just about an 8 out of 10. But that's what we think. But we want to know what you think. Reach out to us on our social media accounts. If you hated Avatar, if you loved Avatar, if you're going to go see it this weekend, the new one, let us know. You can find us on all of our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, @FilmWhiskey.
Or you can jump onto our Discord. We are on Discord every single day talking to you guys, the fans of the Film and Whiskey podcast. So if you want to join the conversation, you can download Discord and join our channel. You'll find a link to it at the end of every single one of our show notes.
Hang on for another couple minutes. I'm going to give you my impressions of Avatar: The Way of Water, but Brad and I will sign off here. We'll see you next week for Aliens, which I'm freaking pumped about. What a great movie. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time. All right, let's talk Avatar: The Way of Water a little bit. I went to see this on Thursday night, 10:55 p.m. screening. That movie is 3 hours and 15 minutes long. So with trailers, I got home at 3 o'clock in the morning. It is a long movie. Does it need to be 3 hours and 15 minutes long? Probably not. I think when you're approaching that length of a movie, there has to be a reason. It has to say something so deep and so profound that it justifies being 3 hours long. And in a lot of ways, this just feels like the second chapter in an ongoing saga. And so does it need to be 40 minutes longer than the original? Probably not, but it also didn't feel like it dragged to me. I know some critics are saying that second hour really felt like it dragged. For me, it didn't feel that way. And Cameron really expands upon the universe that he created in the first one. I think whereas in the first one, he was very much interested in just getting down to brass tacks. In this one, there's much more emotion behind everything. And he introduces you to Jake Sully and Neytiri's family and their 4 children and all of the, many, many plot developments that come from having 4 children, some of whom are teenagers. But you learn a lot more about the dynamics between the different tribes of the Na'vi. Obviously the plot mechanism of this movie is that they're being hunted by the Marines again, and so they have to flee to a tribe of people who are water people. They live on islands, they're out on the water, they go under the water for long periods of time. And so you get acclimated to this new world just as Jake Sully's family does. But there's a much more, spiritual connection in this movie. The way that he played up the spirit tree in the first movie, this one goes so much deeper into the connection between all living things. If you're not on board for a whale creature having subtitles in English while speaking whale, then this might not be the movie for you. But I'll tell you what, it worked for me. I thought this was a significantly better movie than the first one. It goes so much deeper emotionally. I think that the technology is advanced like crazy. The level of detail on the Na'vi skin at this point is kind of staggering. They make Jake Sully look so much more expressive. And I think that was probably something that Cameron really emphasized this time around, because Sam Worthington's performance in the first one has drawn so much criticism. But it's really great. It's a nuanced, layered performance, and the technology has caught up a little bit. There are still moments with some of the characters where their skin looks a little bit rubbery. There are still some shots that are oh, they probably didn't spend as much time on that. But I would say 90% of the visual effects are better than anything you've seen since the original Marvel or since the original Avatar, and so much better than what Marvel's currently doing that you kind of forgive the other 10%. To me, it's go see it on the biggest screen possible. I saw it in 2D. If 3D is important to you, then God bless you. But I always try to see a movie in 2D first, just so I can determine, does it work as a movie? Aside from the gimmick of the 3D. I might go back and see it in 3D because Cameron's so good at using it. But for me, it's better than the first one. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is a movie theater movie. If you saw Top Gun Maverick in the theater, then you owe it to yourself to see this one in the theater. 3 hours and 15 minutes. You're definitely getting your money's worth. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. And that's my review of Avatar: The Way of Water. We'll see you next week.